I guess we should get started. I feel a little bit sort of like the old Smothers Brothers up here, except that we've got a third brother. My real brother is Dave off to this side, and then Wayne Danhauer, and they've both got some little anecdotes that they're going to mention once I finish. And Dave has urged me not to take more than 2 hours with what I have to say, otherwise they'll fall asleep. So when I first walked in here, though, and I saw all these people with canes and those fellows with the shiny heads and the ladies with the lovely gray hair, I thought I must have been in the wrong place. But then I looked over at these guys and I thought, no, I guess I'm in the right spot. But I really thought it was just a meeting of the Hedley Old Folks Society. But anyway, I suspect that even though our outsides have changed a little bit, our hair and our knees and those kind of things, that we still have the same spirit that we had when we were up at the nickel plate, even though that was, for most of us, I guess, probably 60, 70 years ago. But I also suspect that this reunion is much better than, say, a reunion of a big city school, where the talk would probably all just be of teachers and courses and sports and that type of stuff, where here it's the adventures that we had up at the nickel plate and the things that we learned up there that sort of guided us through the rest of our life. And so those are some of the things that I want to mention. But I thought I would just say a few oldies here before we get into the serious stuff. And there was one by a lady called Natalie Babbitt. I don't know who she was, maybe some of you folks do. But she said, "My childhood is very vivid to me. I don't feel very different now from the way I felt then. It would appear that I am the very same person now, only with wrinkles." So I would concur with that. And there was another one that if you don't learn to laugh when you're young, you won't have anything to laugh at when you're old. And at the nickel plate, we definitely did laugh a lot. We had a lot of fun. And on the sort of little shot at the men here, one quote was, "I'm 42 around the chest, 52 around the waist, 102 around the golf course, and a nuisance around the house." So anybody sort of relate to that? Now, on the little talk that I wanted to just give as briefly as I can here, when Bob mentioned this get-together quite a while ago, I started thinking about how the nickel plate influenced me and what I did later in life. At the time, when I was at the nickel plate, I kind of thought, you know, what an awful place to live. I just wish I could get out of here and live in a big city. But then later I realized it did give me a lot of good background that I could use later in life. And so for the few little comments I've got here, I just wanted to say that it's sort of like the book that was written a few years ago that was titled, "All I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten." Anybody read that or heard of it? Well, I could just change what I'm saying to say I learned at the nickel plate. And I think that, you know, one of the most important things I learned was being to get along with everybody, because up there you had to. There was no room for dictators or bullies or kids that just wanted to sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Everybody had to get along in whatever it was that we did. And so you developed a lot of respect for each other and everybody that was there, including the older people. You didn't sort of ignore them because everybody was just part of one great big group. Now, there were no organized activities. We developed, if we wanted activities, we developed our own, like sliding down the hill in the wintertime on cardboard just below Palumbo's house. Is it, I think it was Jimmy Palumbo, wasn't it? See here? Ray here? Does he remember that? Anyway, it was a lot of fun. And then there was the kick the can and anti-eye over the Shack's garage, and you know, those kind of old games that were a lot of fun. And psychologists now are saying that kids need more of that sort of thing. They need to know how to just go out there and play, because the modern kids don't really know how to do that. They know how to push buttons and run computers and TV and all those things. but they don't really know how to play and have fun. And that's one of the things that we definitely had up there. There was certainly nothing like parents driving their kids anywhere. If you wanted to go somewhere, you either walked, or if you had a bike, you rode your bike. So we got exercise and had a lot of fun doing it. Now, of course, parents even drive their high school kids to school. Even if there's a bus system, they'll still drive their kids. So I don't think it's teaching them some good lessons like what we learned up there. And also, if we wanted money, we were told to earn it. I don't remember anybody getting allowances, but there was pin setting in the bottom of the community hall and collecting beer bottles. And I've got a little story on that later. So, and we also learned a great appreciation for the outdoors, including the wildlife. And as Dave Suzuki mentioned, kids nowadays have a nature deficit. They hardly know what you're talking about if you're mentioning something about being out in the bush, going for a hike, talking about trees and wildlife and flowers and that sort of thing. So we learned what he would call the excitement of discovery on our own. It wasn't through TV or guided trips or that sort of thing. We just learned it on our own. And we also learned things like the use of hand tools, axes and saws and hammers and all that stuff, which kids these days hardly know what you're talking about if you mention those sort of things. But we learned to do that. We learned how to use a .22 if we had one, not recklessly, but I'd carry one with me when I went go for a hike and shoot pine cones off trees and things like that.
Can't
but
eat them things, though.
What's that?
They're not edible.
Pine cones?
No.
Unless you're a squirrel. But can you imagine a city kid walking down the street these days with a .22 or anything like that? Or they don't have basements to work in where they can experiment with hand tools and stuff, so they've really missed a lot compared to what we had. And then there's one other little thing about the incremental pleasures that we had up there. We didn't get one monstrous plastic package of some kind for Christmas or birthdays. We might get little things that could then be added to at a future time. So we really looked forward to a lot of that. So all of this really taught us that that life is a journey through all of these kind of little things, these little pleasures, rather than just being a destination. And I'm now at my old age of, still enjoying that journey, like we're doing right here today. So I got two quick little stories. One, as I mentioned earlier, was collecting beer bottles. Now, Dave and I needed money to, buy little things with and so on. So we would collect beer bottles all year round from the bunkhouses, because the miners loved their beer, and they drink a fair amount on Friday nights, and Saturday morning there'd always be a few cases of beer bottles out on the porches of the bunkhouses. So we made sure that we got out there as early as we could. In the wintertime we'd have our toboggan, and we were always conscious of the Emery brothers being on the lower row of bunkhouses because they were doing the same thing. I think Gordon is here, but I don't believe Dale is here. But here's Gordon right here. So they were the competition. So they would usually clean out the bottom row bunkhouses. We'd get the top, and we'd make about I think Dave and I would get maybe $50 a year for all of those beer bottles, which to us in those days was a huge sum of money. But a little story about that also is that we would collect beer bottles on the Sunday morning, and then we'd have to rush home and get changed so we could get to Sunday school. And my mom was the superintendent of Sunday school up there, so we had to make sure we got dressed quickly, got up to the community hall to go to Sunday school, but sometimes the time was a little tight. So we'd quickly unload the beer bottles and not bother to change and just rush off to Sunday school. But Mom got a little story from one of the ladies who claimed to her that one of her kids had mentioned to her something about how come when the brown boys come to Sunday school they always smell of beer. Another little short story about the bobsled we had up there. One winter, Dad decided that he'd like to make us a little bobsled, and he had these two old sleds with these round steel runners that he'd had for quite a while. So he put a plank between these two with the back sled fixed to the plank and the front sled that you could steer with ropes. And we would ride that on the community hall hill. Anybody remember that? Anyway, Gordon remembers it. Somebody back there remembers it. And who's that way back there? Oh, God, hi, great, yeah. So I think we had a lady member of the riding team as well. No? Anyway, we had a lot of fun on that. Dave was usually at the front steering, and I'd be at the back to give a good big push from the community hall. Go down that hill, we'd do this tight turn at the bottom and hopefully not crash into the snowbank. Most of the times we were successful, but on one particular day, we got to the top, we got to the parking lot by the hall, and there were a group of kids there on skis. And they looked at us and said, you know, what are you guys doing up here? We've reserved this hill for us. So get your funny looking little sleigh out of here and let us do our skiing. And they started off down the hill. We had a quick little conference and decided that we weren't going to let these guys intimidate us. We were going to go down there anyway. So we started down, and about halfway down, we saw them, or they were about halfway up the hill when we started down, and they tried to make a little sort of a barricade across the road with their skis, but there was no way we were going to stop, and we couldn't have stopped anyway. So we just went clattering over their skis and kept on going to the bottom, because they were pretty mad about that. And when we got to the bottom, we turned, where we more or less kept going straight ahead up that little road to Bogastown. Everybody remember Bogastown? So we kept on going up that hill, as far as we could. Looked back, saw these guys kicking off their skis and running in their ski boots after us, but we were a little faster because we just had the rubber boots, so we pulled on our bobsled and kept on running up the hill and around the corner and got away from them. But forever after that, every time I came down to Hedley, I was always worried about meeting these guys. And I don't know if there's any of them here today or not, but I'm still concerned that they might still want to beat us up. So, but anyway, we had a lot of fun with that bobsled. The miners also built a sled that they thought was pretty good and challenged us to a race on the hill. But their sled had flat runners, couldn't turn at the bottom, and we just left them way far behind. And I don't think they ever came back out. Just one more little sled item, and that is that one time I guess we went a little too far down the hill, but when I started to come back up, I was just so weak I could hardly walk along the sled, let alone try and pull it. But we finally got up to the top, and I was just about ready to collapse. Got home. Mom was a nurse and said, I think you got pneumonia, but we better have the doctor in Hedley come up just in case. So, of course, the only way he could get up was the next day on the skip, but he came up. Sure enough, I had pneumonia, and I was sort of out of it for about a week, and she was a nurse, so she gave me these long, long needles in the rear end for about 4 hours every day for all that time. Oh, it's the worst experience I've ever had in my life. Hope I never have to go through that again. Now, just one more little story, and this is about Dave, so that he can sort of contradict me if he wants to on this one. I haven't bounced this one off him, so I've got to be kind of careful. But anyway, we would. Are you going to tell the true story? No. I promise.
A better story.
Well, his might be better. His is. I'm not sure whether his is true or not, but I think it is. But mine's pretty close to it. We used to go to Vancouver on our holidays because my mom's parents lived down there, so we'd always go down there. But Dave was always kind of worried about going to the big city, not knowing kind of how to act in restaurants or banks or use the phone or the streetcars or any of that kind of stuff. You know, we were kind of the hicks from out here in the bush. But he thought, well, being the studious type, I'll get a book on all this. So he got an Emily Post thing on etiquette in the big city and how to act and all these sort of things, do it properly. You know, and so you know, on the next trip down, he thought, well, I'll try out, you know, what she suggests. And Granville Street and Broadway weren't too far away, so he just wandered over there one morning and thought, well, I'll try out the breakfast thing first, because that's the easiest. So he walked into this nice little place and said, I'd like some eggs Benedict, but go easy on the hollandaise sauce, and I'd like some Earl Grey tea. She kind of put her hand on his shoulder and patted it a little bit and said, he said, you must be from the Nickel Plate. And Dave said, well, how do you know? And she said, this is a hardware store. think that's true. He'll probably rebut that. So that's really all I want to offer. Over at the senior center, there's a class picture there of about 1948, I think. So if anybody recognizes anybody in that picture, if you could put their name on the list I've left over there, and then what I'd like to do at the end is hand it over to the museum because they're missing some of those names. So with that, I think I should just turn it over to Smothers' brother number 2. He's the intellectual one. I think I was supposed to be the goofy one or something. I don't know, but if you remember that series. So Dave, here it is. It's all yours.
Good for you, Murray.
So I'm Murray's quite younger brother. And we'll start off by, can you turn to Psalm number 23 in your songbooks? Damn, they brought the beer but not the books. Okay. Anyway, I left with our folks obviously, but I left Nickel Plate when I was about 10 years old, and we headed off to places after that. So that gives you an idea of how long ago, that was for sure. And I wanted to actually talk about having a reunion and how important it is for people to get together, bring old memories, and then 10 minutes later, of course, you've forgotten the names. But to talk about reunions is a very part of our human society. And this is like a tribe, really, in terms of getting together. And the other nice part about reunions is that I got a confession of sorts today from Joanne Kelly. Now, did she end up here? Joanne, would you mind standing up? I'm just so impressed. Yes, and actually she said, she read my name tag, she said, David Brown? She said, oh no, I threw a rock at you when we were up by the community hall at Nickel Plate, and I hit you, and I think you dropped in your tracks. And she said, I had to go back up and apologize to your mom about hitting you with a rock. And I said, a rock? I don't even remember that, Joanne. And she said, oh yeah, there was a group of us, and all of a sudden we all started throwing rocks at each other. I said, Nickel Plate kids didn't throw rocks at each other, but I guess obviously they did. And my mom tells the story about kids at Halloween, told the story, and I went home and I said to my dad, where's Mom? She said, well, she's up at the first aid station because there were some kids setting off blasting caps, and they blew off their fingers. I went, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Do you remember that part of that story or anything around? And so for that. Anyway, and the other story I have is I really was instrumental in starting Murray's career, because when we were about, pre-10-year-old, 8 or 9 years old, and if you were at the Nickel Plate, you may remember a great big tree, big fir tree. It was lovely even 50 years ago. And we decided we're going to build a tree fort up in the tree. So we got some boards together and we put them down, and then I said, well, how are we going to get them up there? So Murray, in his pre-engineering mind, said, well, that's easy. What we'll do is we'll tie a rope around the boards down here, and then we'll take a pulley away up top where we're going to build our tree fort. And he said, what I'll do is I'll jump off, and then I'll pull you up with the boards tied to me, of course. And of course, pre-engineering, he said, well, we better balance out the weight. So we had some branches, and we tied some branches around to me. So good old Murr, he jumps off. I take off like a rocket because the tree branches fell off. And I went up about 3 branches, hit my head on a branch, let go of the rope, came crashing down into the thing. And this was springtime, but there's a little patch of snow by the bottom of the tree. And when I lifted up my head, there's a great big patch of blood. So I'm going, oh, great, Murray, this is really bright to do that. So we went up to see our mom, and Murray said, Mom, David cut his head. And she looked at it and said, okay. Being the nurse she was, let's go down to Hedley to see the doctor, get your stitches. And I got 3 stitches. Oh, it was just so neat for the first kid to get stitches. And it's still there. Now, I blame Joanne for the rock, but now I'm confessing it really wasn't that, Joanne. It was the coming down the tree. So in Hedley, coming to Hedley reminds me of a story about Hedley. Now, I don't know if you knew it or not, But Hedley used to have a very active Hells Angels motorcycle gang. Did anybody belong to that or know anything about that? Okay, well, it's a different crowd. So anyway, there was a Hedley person who had a motorcycle and wanted, like anything, to join the Hells Angels. Hey, Murray. How are you? And so he'd go every once in a while and say, can I join? Can I? They said, no, you can't join the Hells Angels. We're a tough group, and you have to do something spectacular and come and tell us about it, and survive it, of course. So he said, oh, well, okay. So he came over to Campbell River, where I live, and it's a good fishing area, and there's also a number of fish and dogfish, shark, they're swimming around. While he was fishing in his tin boat, went over, went into the water, shark got him by the wrist, didn't quite sever his wrist, but it was kind of hanging down, and he got back into the boat, took his fishing line around his wrist and sewed it back on, like this. Got it. Oh, like that. So he comes back to the Hedley group and says, hey guys, can I join? Can I join? And they said, well, what have you done? Anything? He said, well, I'll tell you the story. So we told them the story, and they were really impressed. They say, okay, just wait outside for a minute. We got to talk about this. So they come out and said, come on in. So he goes into the group, and they say, you know what? You're in. And he goes, right on. Got it? Anyway, it's got more laughs than that. But anyway, so that's probably about it for chit-chatting and talking and everything. But it's just so nice to be part of a reunion. I think it's very important for our psyche that we have reunions. And you know, when we all lived in caves, and the kids decided to move out, they'd say, "What do you want to leave for? You're crazy. It's warm in here. It's dry. We got a fire going. And we got an unlimited supply of mammoth meat and that sort of stuff to eat. But this is also the same kind of thing as all getting together." So I'm going to turn the mic over to Wayne now, and come on up, Wayne, and there you go.
Well done, David. Hi, everyone. My name is Wayne Danhauer, and I was in Nickel Plate from 1944 to 1950. Left when I was 6 years old, so my memories are rather vague, but I just wanted to pass on a couple of them as I recall them. Who do I remember from Nickel Plate? I certainly remember the Richards family, the Browns, the Shacks, the Grahams, Plumbos, Heskes, and Hensby's, and others that I can't put on right now. But those are the people I remember as a young boy. And what things do I remember about Nickel Plate? Well, I remember every year, or not every year, but a couple of the last years we were there, I was so excited to go to the Browns circus. They had a little circus set up in their yard. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And we used to go, and we could throw darts at balloons, and they would have little things hanging down and little prizes and little house of horrors that we'd look into and get all scared. And it was like my kids going to Disneyland today. It was going to the Browns, because this was so exciting. It was that's all there was, and it was wonderful. There was stupid little things, like I remember watering my lawn in front of the house. We were in number 50 across from Graham's and Columbus, and there was a miner walking. I was out watering the grass. I was probably 4 years old, and this miner walked down the street, and he walked right by in front of me, so I turned the hose on him. And I just stood there and turned the hose on. Well, he didn't take that standing. He just walked over, grabbed the hose, and started spraying me. And well, that didn't go over very well. I was pretty upset about that. So I went running into my mom, and of course, it was a silly little thing like that with, you know, from the past. I remember the ski hill. There was a little rope tow. We used to go skiing, and it was not far out of town. Does anybody remember the little ski hill we had? Yeah? Yeah, you bet. We used to go up and down that and pretend we knew how to ski. And the other thing I do remember is the lake. Nickel Plate Lake was our playground. We had, my father was a carpenter at the mine, and he was also very active in the Rod and Reel Club, Sid Danhauer. And we had this Rod and Reel Club with a cabin out at the lake, And the lake was, of course, at 6,000 feet, and the fish weren't going to naturally grow there, so the only way you could get them was either seeding the lake, which wasn't done much back in those days. So my father and a group of the Rod and Reel Club, they set up these spawning channels, and they worked with the fisheries department from UBC, the inland fisheries, the freshwater fishery department, and they came up and they put in these spawning beds, and they imported shrimp from down at Yellow Lake, and they spread these shrimp around, and the trout were going, they just had a great fishery going in that little place just done by the local Rod and Reel Club. It was a this is the kind of thing that happens with a small community. You get all this excitement and all this input and all this volunteerism that takes place. So that's a great memory. Unfortunately, when the mine closed, of course, the lake was dammed. It was quite a bit higher than it is today, and they lowered the lake because they were afraid of a washout. Consequently, all these spawning channels disappeared because, of course, the lake went down too low, and that all ended. So I suppose they just seed it with an airplane or something like that. So that's my little memories of nickel plate. The other thing I remember is coming up and down that skip. We used to, is Ray here, Palumbo? I mean, him and his mom and my mom and I, we'd jump on top of the ore pile on top of the skip, and we'd come right down to the bottom, and they'd let us off, and we'd go shopping here in Hedley, and then we'd jump in the empty car, go back up again. Probably many of you remember going up and down the skip. That was a lot of fun. Can you imagine doing that today in a mine? Just wouldn't happen. Anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you folks, and I wish you all a great reunion, and thank you for listening to my little vignettes.
Yeah, so actually Wayne and I are just a couple weeks apart, and funny enough, last night I was looking through old pictures, and I got a picture in Skaha Lake of my dad and his dad. And I think that might have been the journey to nickel plate, and both Wayne and I are babies, just in the arm kind of. So I'll have to show you that later, Wayne. Wayne mentioned, I thought I'd just give a few little stories from my background. I only did grade 1 there, and then we moved, and I know when I talked with Bob.
Can I interrupt you? You really have to talk this way.
Like that? Is that okay? Sorry. Glad you told me. Yeah, when I talked with Bob about this, and I was thinking, about memories, and it was a fantastic place for sure as growing up as a small kid. And I've just got a few stories that I was kind of adventurous to the point of overdoing it, and so I got a couple stories on that. Actually, they're secrets because I never actually told my mom and dad or anybody else. So, but before we get to that, when Wayne mentioned the ski hill, and I don't know whether he got the same skis. When I was about 4, and Wayne would have been 4 too, somewhere in there, I got a new pair of skis, and all they had for harness was a slot under the foot and a strap over the top. And I put these on, and your foot would go sideways and everything, so I guess I wasn't too interested in the skis. And then shortly after, Wayne's dad shows up, who could fix anything, and he had some lengths of rubber, and he made a kind of a thing that would pull back over my heel, and those skis were great after that. And just a little story, so the hill was right below our house, and I'd go over there, and with 2 smaller, Linda and Paul were quite a bit smaller than me. My mom was kind of tied up with them, so I had a lot of freedom, and I loved that. So I'd go on the hill, and I think I'd ski down, and then maybe take my skis off and walk back up. I'd just do it. And I remember one day, in quite a snowstorm, I think Marie and David maybe running gates, but we're almost the same age now, but they were way older when I was a kid of 4 or 5. And anyhow, the one thing of being so young, I was a little afraid at the bottom of the hill. I kind of, flattened out, but not totally. And then there were some trees, past that. And being a small kid, I didn't know what was in those trees, and I was pretty afraid of it. And one day, late in the day, In fact, everybody had gone home except me, and I'm climbing up the hill, carrying my skis, and I fumbled the whole thing. One ski falls off, and it shoots straight down the hill, and I'm hoping it's going to turn over and stop, but it went straight down, straight across a flat and into the trees. And I thought, wow, you know, first thought was maybe I go home and get some help. And then I'm thinking, you know, if I want to be sure I've got a pair of skis, I got to go there myself, you know. So anyhow, you know, long story short, I got down there. The ski had gone in a bit, but I was pretty proud when I came out of there with my skis. And so that was that. I think I was watching my mom and dad a lot, doing whatever they did, you know, and so, and often, as I say, my mom was tied up with Linda and Paul, and, you know, we didn't, I mean, I could go anywhere on the property outside or whatever. So one day my mom was tied up, didn't see anybody, and I thought, you know, I've been watching them light the kitchen stove, which was wood, and I thought, you know, I'm going to light the stove today. And I got the matches out, got the big matches, and I'd seen my dad bunch the paper, and he used to cut kindling with shiplap just with a butcher knife, just peel off a few things. And I thought, I don't need the kindling, and so I got some paper, and I bunched it all up like he did, and had the matches. And then I thought, and I wasn't much higher than the stovetop, like my height. Anyhow, I thought, you know, I'll just, I couldn't find the handles to open the top of the stove, so I thought I'll just, I'll put the paper on top and light it up. Of course, then I'm pretty committed, which I did. And the paper flared up much more than I thought, just to show you what could have happened. And I'm standing there, and it, you know, it flares up about 2 or 3 feet, and I'm worried that the wall is going to catch on behind. And I just drew a blank. I looked up, I couldn't even reach the taps, and I just, all of a sudden, I couldn't even think. Thank God the thing gradually died down, bunch of ashes and everything, stuffed it in a garbage can, and never said a peep, just got out of there. And the other thing, and I think, like all the boys, we really got enthused about cars. And we had, in those days, you know, we had a 39 Plymouth pre-war car with, you know, 3 on the floor, a tall gear shift. And one day, I remember when I was very small, we were driving along maybe to Karameas, maybe to Princeton. And my dad sat me between his knees in the front seat and let me steer. And it was on a straight stretch, and so, you know, I was all pumped with that. So we got home, and anyhow, sometime later, the one thing that happened, I had my bones in my foot weren't quite right on one foot, so I had to wear boots until I was 8 years old. So I had these boots. We had a garage just below the house, and what I liked, the age I was then, I could stand on, the car had running boards, so I could stand on the running boards, and I could even get my elbows inside. It was perfect. I could look inside, and then when we drove down the road, I could stand in the back and have my chin was over the seat and just watch everything. So all of a sudden one day, Dad said, we wound up getting a 46 Dodge, and incidentally all from Parker Brothers, who are still in business today. And so Dad said, we got a new car or something like that. I whipped out of the house, ran down to the garage. The garage is just below, and if there were lights in there, I don't think so. But anyhow, I went to get on the running board like normal, and I couldn't get any grip with my boots, and I was hanging on trying to get it, you know, and I couldn't see. And of course, you're not very logical when you're maybe 4 or something, or younger. So I was scuffing away trying to get a grip on the door, and then I didn't kind of click, couldn't get that done, and then I came back again and tried the same thing again, still couldn't get a grip, and I don't know how the door looked after all that, but I finally realized this car doesn't have running boards, but the doors flared out, kind of, sort of phony running boards, sort of, but anyhow, so love cars. So then where our house was, above the house, there was a flat road there, and then people lived above that. And in that flat road, there was a garage above our house too, that had a sloping driveway into it. And one day I'm outside and I see our car up there in this, parked on this driveway, and I don't know why. Anyhow, I got up there and jumped inside. It was all open and everything, and I'm sawing away on the steering wheel, and I grabbed the gear shift. I'm yanking away like Dad does, and all of a sudden the car popped out of gear and it starts rolling. And I look ahead, and it's about probably 40 feet or so to where the road goes by, and I remember all these just like it was yesterday, like we all do. There's something that really sticks with you. And I thought, gee, I have to make that corner because it's, you know, everything's on a slope and it's over the bank. And I thought about that for about a tenth of a second. Then I was scared out of my mind. And I cranked it into the bank, and I think the downhill helped. But anyhow, I turned the car into the bank, and a lot of dirt had slumped out. The car kind of ground to a halt. And there were boulders and everything that had slumped out of that bank, so I didn't actually do a bunch of paint damage on it. But I jumped out of there and never did any of those things again. So there's a couple stories for you. Nickel plate days.
Anyhow, how many of you people have ever had a boat ride down the hill? Me. Yeah, you. Yeah. Well, there was a group of us walking down the lower road in town where there was some garages. This was at winter time. And it was Uncle Howard's or Uncle Ernie's boat that was sitting under the garage, and we could see it through the snow. So there was about 5 or 6 of us kids walking down there, but Tom and I, we get this boat pulled out, and we pointed it downhill and hopped in. And boy, does it really go downhill good. You can't steer it very well. When you come up to a barbed wire fence, all of a sudden you go like this on the flat of the boat, and we made it through that, all right. But a little while further, there was a few trees ahead of us, and we wedged ourselves in right solidly. So we couldn't budge it out. So we walked down to the road and back up to town. And I don't know to this day if they ever recovered that boat. So I got to apologize to whoever boat it was. Okay. And, okay, the horses up there. There was horses up there every summer. And we used to chase them quite often, and they'd end up chasing them down to a little corral below the upper depot of the tramway here. So Ray, Tom, and I were down there at this corral, and all of a sudden, Tom falls into the well.
Ah, shut up.
No, he did. It wasn't you. It was Tom. Okay, so, you know, he couldn't go home with him all soap and wet, so there were lots of bushes around, sunshine. We spread his clothes around and got him more or less dried out, and okay, it was getting late. So we hops on the train that was down at the depot, dumping the ore, goes up to our house, and this part I just love. Ray has a bit of a poetry in him, and it hit him as we just got to our place, and he hops off the train and he runs down to the house. We didn't want Mom to know, but he said, "I know something I won't tell. Tommy fell in a well." So Mom did know. Okay. Yeah, well, rightly so. Okay, you fell in. Okay. And then we always did a lot of exploring and stuff around the old glory holes and mines. 2 short ones. In the glory hole above our place, we were playing there, and we decided we were going to try and find our way around so we could sneak out and ambush the people that had us pinned down in there. So Tom and I are walking down this old tunnel, no lights or anything, and all of a sudden we fall. Well, there was a big hole in the bottom of that drift we were walking down. It must have been like that high. Okay, and it was completely dark, so when we landed, we couldn't believe we were still unhurt. So we were scrambling around on our hands and knees, and okay, there's a little bit of a dip here. We find a wall. Now, which wall it was, we didn't know because it was dark. So we grab our hands together and we're following the wall with our hands on the wall, hoping we're heading the right direction. And we're heading the right direction because we're here today. We did find our way back out. And the other one I remember, I believe it was Gordon and I, we were walking down the tracks, and there was an old tunnel off the side of the tracks. This was in the springtime, so there was still much snow on the ground. And we look at this tunnel, and it's got the cracked timbers and the white mildew hanging off it. So, well, we're going to explore in there anyhow. So we starts in there, and there's a cat, a feral cat, up in the top of the timbers there. And it yells out a scream, and it takes off out of there, and we ended up running out too. Now, I don't know why we were not in the same direction the cat did, and we rolled on that snow, just hysterically laughing. And okay, there was one more too. There's a little one below the main track and above the garbage dump. There was a little old tunnel with a caved in front and just enough room that us kids could slither in. And I don't know who I was with this day, but we slithered in and we had a torch of sorts. And we went in, and all of a sudden we swore, both of us swore, that we saw a skeleton at the end of the tunnel. Well, we hightailed it out there and fought to see who could get out through that little opening that we had to crawl out as fast as we could. And it took us years before I crawled back in there again. So this is just a few I've got right now, and I'm not going to tie up the mic, so I'll hand it up to somebody else, and I could always come back later if I need to.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm Pat Elbeck now, but I was Patsy Williams when I was at Nickel Plate. My dad was Dibbs Williams, and he was the mine manager from 1950 to 1955. So I was there from the age of 5 until I was 10. When they closed the mine down, we came down and we lived at the Douglas house, which is down on the corner before you get to the road up the hill. I lived there for 6 months, but I just thought I'd go from my memoirs that I'm gonna leave them here for the museum. But what did we do with our days? Well, in the summer, we played out in the yard, swinging on the backyard swing that Dad had hung from a big evergreen tree. I remember him going up the tree and putting a big birdhouse up in the tree, banged his finger with a hammer, and he said a real bad word. Because I was like 6 or 7, you didn't use bad words, but Dad did. We would also climb up onto the top of the garage roof. Now this, I think, is the same garage that Mr. Shack here was talking about, because he was the mine manager. His dad was the mine manager before we were, and so we lived in the same house. So when you talk about that garage, we used to climb up. There was a big tree beside it, and we used to climb up and play on the roof and jump down onto the lawn. And that was a real sharp corner you would have had to try to get around down past the Monroe's house. But we loved playing on the top of the roof of the garage. And we used to play out on the road. We played kick the can. Kids these days don't know about these games, but it was kick the can or tag or Red Rover send Marley over, and we played out in the middle of the road all of the time. And we biked. We rode our bikes everywhere. That's how we got from one place to the other. That's how we got to the other side of town. I don't remember what it was called, where the little houses were. There was the poplar grove that we used to go and play in that had grass, and we'd stomple the grass down. We'd get there with our bike. But the big thing was the tennis courts, and we'd go down to the tennis courts. I don't remember anybody ever playing tennis on the tennis courts, but we'd ride the bikes around and around and around in circles till we were just sweating hot. And just outside the tennis courts, there was a big well house. And you'd go inside the well house, and it was cool and dark. And I don't remember how, there was water there of some sort. And we'd cool ourselves off with the water and have a good drink, and then go back and ride around and around the tennis courts. And one day there was a dog someplace up the bunkhouses, and I'm riding down the hill from there, and going lickety-split, and the dog comes chasing after me, bites me in the middle of my back. I don't know whose dog that was. I wish I'd owned up to it, but I was scared of dogs for a long time. What else did we do? I remember playing in the yard with Daphne French, catching bumblebees in Mum's canning jars, and loading straws to drink from full of grass so that we could smoke them in the little coal sheds that we had at the road. We used to steal cigarettes from Mum and Dad and from Daphne's Mum and Dad and try smoking real ones once in a while, but we had coal bins at the road. Nobody could see us if we climbed in them, so we were kind of sneaking them. And then my best friend was probably Daphne French, and we used to play dolls a lot and had baby buggies. And one day my baby buggy disappeared, Garnet. You remember that? It disappeared. I couldn't find it for about a week, and when I finally found it, Garnet had absconded with it and stolen the wheels for, I don't know what he got them for, but that was the kind of things we did. Nobody did anything for malice. It was all for fun. But in the wintertime, we had the skating rink up by the school, but it required a lot of shoveling. Now, I just found out today that there was actually a ski hill there before I got to Nickel Plate, and I didn't know that. But I know that while I was there, they got like a donkey engine or something going and a rope tow going to the top of the ski hill. And about 6 years old, I learned how to ski, and we had a cable tow. And our fingers got so full of metal slivers that some of the guys, I don't know who invented it, a little wrench type thing made out of wood that you could hook onto the cable, and then you bent it, and you could get pulled up to the top of the ski hill without getting all these metal slivers. And a couple of years later, they finally got it changed to a rope tow, but we still kept using those little wrench things to hang on, because the rope tow would just burn your mitts to pieces and worked really good. I remember too when Ole, one of the guys that worked in the mine, he looked at my dad and he says, she knows how to do the stem Christie really good. Now you better get some edges on her skis. So my dad ordered them up from Sears Roebuck, and a month or so later I had edges on my skis. Boy, was I something then. I remember learning how to do the stem Christie from Ole. Coming home all by myself, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was hungry, and Mom said, no, I'm not going to go back to the house, but you can go do it. And opening a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. And 7 or 8, like he said, barely as tall as the stove, but I heated it up and got the pot out and opened the can and had myself a whole can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. I still love it today. Sledding down the road has been mentioned before. I remember going down the road in front of Monroe's house, and I don't know where it went, but it went way down, and we'd ride our sleds down, and we had to pull the sleds back up afterwards, and then you could go riding down. But one year, Dad built a bobsled. Now, I don't think it was like the one he was describing. I think it was more like the one the miners had that lost all the races. But there was 3 or 4 people could fit on one of those sleds. And if you had a good driver, you could get most of the way down the hill before you crashed into the bank or something. But we had more fun going up and down that hill. Somebody was telling me the story. They remember my dad taking our Mercury, it would be a 49 or 50 Mercury, and hooking the bobsleds onto the back of the car and pulling them up the hill, because they were a lot heavier to pull up than the sleds were. I couldn't remember how we got them up, but according to somebody here, my dad pulled them up with a car. And digging caves. The snowbanks along the side of the roads were 10 feet high. So we used to dig big caves. You could crawl around in them, and we had a whole series of caves hooked up to each other, and Mom and Dad never worried about those caves collapsing on us. Today, nobody would be allowing their kids to go digging into the snowbanks and building caves and crawling around in them, but we sure had a lot of fun doing that. We had swings in a number of places, and I remember one of the kids sticking his tongue onto the leg of the swing set in the middle of the winter. You know what happens when you stick your tongue onto the metal leg of a swing set in the middle of winter? It freezes to the pipe, and it's not a nice procedure to get it off. I think a few of us did that. And one of the things about winter I remember is I never got cold. We didn't have fancy gear that you got today, but we didn't get cold. We also had the community hall up past the bunkhouses, and I think that's been mentioned. We had all kinds of events up there. I don't think anybody's mentioned the Disney movies, and I don't know how often we had them, but we frequently had, Pinocchio and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and it was quite a big event when they got a movie up there, and we all got to go up and watch the movies. But after the movies, we went up, and I think it was Mrs. Richardson up by the schoolhouse must have bought molds from Walt Disney Company, and she made plaster of Paris molds of these Disney characters, and we used to go up there and paint them, and we spent a lot of time in the winter probably painting the Disney characters. And another big thing everybody remembered, my brother Ronnie. He had Perthes disease and used to get around the house on a little trolley because he had a cast from his chest down to his ankles for 6 months, and then he had crutches for 3 years. Nowadays they just put somebody in an A-frame splint, and that's what they've got for about a year and a half or maybe 8 months, and they're gone. They're fine. But my brother had that for 3.5 years, and he was just absorbed into the community. Everybody helped him get places, and the community supported him so much that he just, well, I don't know how many communities that would have helped a little kid out like they helped my brother. And he has no consequences from that, but he wasn't able to make it down here today. He was also the fastest kid in the neighborhood on those crutches because he could go 3 times as far with every step. So nobody dared to race against Ronnie. And Halloween was always a very special time. Everybody got really dressed up and went trick-or-treating. It was different in those days because you didn't just go trick-or-treat and get candy. It was trick-or-treat, and you had to do the trick in order to get the treat. So I would spend weeks before Halloween getting whatever I was going to do planned up. And used to recite poetry. I don't know what everybody else did. And it was a really special time of the year. And it was always somebody out there that was not as small as we were. I remember one year there was a witch, a real witch. And I came back and I told my mom and dad about it, and they said, "Oh no, I don't think that's anybody from Nickel Plate. That must be a real witch." Years later, I asked her, and she says, "I don't have a clue who it was, but I have a feeling it was Mrs. Haggard. It would be Mrs. Haggard down by the French's house." Anyway, I was talking to others today, and apparently there was other years where we had people that were out there dressed up. A guy dressed as a lady and a lady dressed as a man, but Halloween was a very special time of year. Another special time of year that I don't think anybody's mentioned is Chinese New Year's. And up at the mine, feeding the guys up in the bunkhouses, there was a cookhouse, and it was run by Chinese men. I don't think there was any women there. It was just all we called them the Chinamen, which I don't think would be acceptable nowadays, but they were an awesome bunch. And on Chinese New Year's, I'm pretty sure it was Chinese New Year's, they invited the whole community up, and we would go up and have Chinese New Year's dinner in the cookhouse. And that was a special event of the year. I don't know if anybody else remembers that. Yeah, it was just so great. I love Chinese food still today. Another big thing was the parents getting together. There was such a sense of community. Everybody was everybody's best friend, and everybody had kids, so there was somebody to babysit your kids. And I don't know how frequently, but I think pretty much every week the parents would get together to play cards or play bridge and do all kinds of things. And if you look in the archives now, there's some pictures of a mock wedding. And they had, I remember them planning for that mock wedding for months beforehand. I don't remember who played what part, but it was quite a big deal. And
the Monroe parents were the ones that got mock.
What was that?
The Monroe parents were the ones that got mock married.
Was it the Monroes got mock married? But there's pictures there. And another big event was just before I left the mine, and it must have been 1950, and unfortunately she couldn't make it here, but Rolly Bush had a baby. And that was a big event, and there's a bunch of pictures now that are in the archives up in the museum about the baby and it being born and the christening, and it was a special event having a new baby in the community. Another thing that hasn't been mentioned is, I don't know where it was, but there was a trap shooting range where they had dug some pits, and they had the traps that would shoot the clay pigeons out. And it would be a whole community weekend event, and you'd go down there and the guys would be shooting traps, and the women would be picking, okay, that's better. The women would be picking berries that would be later canned, and we had jam all winter. And the men would shoot the traps, and sometimes the women, and we'd have a big picnic. But it was the whole community, and this was the whole thing about Nickel Plate is we did things together. We partied together. In the summer we went camping together down in Penticton, Skaha Lake and Okanagan Lake, and that sense of community was sort of held us all together. We were just all one. It's like a big family, and I'll just say that it's really wonderful to reconnect with some of the people that were living there at the mine. And I could go on and on about all of this, but I think the important thing is the positivity of all my memories. I don't recall any of the families quarreling or not getting along. Everyone worked together to make it a better place for everyone, be happy and busy. Oh, the ski hill. I love the ski hill. Still ski. So thank you guys for putting up with the little stories.
Couple things. One, I don't know if everybody knows that I married Shirley Brooks. She was up at Nickel Plate, and we went to school, and we went our separate ways, and eventually crossed paths again, and we ended up being married. Now, that being said, Shirley wants to say, she's not here today, she's got heart problems. She wants to say hello to her first love, Ray Plumbo. And I'm glad to see my first love here, Mabel Hensby. And one last thing. I have over here the map that I had down at the senior center. Now, a lot of discussion was gone about did I live here, did I didn't, and so on and so forth. But what I would suggest and what I would really appreciate is everybody that lived at Nickel Plate come up, sign the map anywhere there's a blank space so that you can say you've been here. Okay, guys, never mind the number of the house, sign the map, and just so say you've been here. Thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. Anyways, the reason I'm here with this book of stories is because, well, my mother, she came over from Czechoslovakia many years ago at the age of 6, and then eventually moved up to the Nickel Plate. And she had some excellent times in her life there, some good memories and everything. But as much as I tried to persuade her, she never did get it down into print. So that's what I've done today. So I've put together well, in this section of life, while I stayed at Nickel Plate, 22 stories, which I'm going to read you a couple. So please bear with me. Too Cold Coke. It was a cold and dark winter evening at our house in Nickel Plate. After we had eaten dinner, Dad and I decided to go to the grocery store at the commissary to get some munchies for the evening. We wanted to get out of the house even though we had to slug through several feet of snow to get to the commissary. It was only a few degrees below freezing with clear star-filled skies as we trudged up the trail to the commissary. As we passed the second bunkhouse where many of the single miners resided, we noticed a window on the second floor being opened and a hand reaching out to check the temperature of 2 bottles of Coke, which were sitting on the windowsill. We went to the commissary and returned back, noticing that the bottles were still there. As we were on a pretty steep slope, the window was directly across from us about 20 feet away. Dad stopped for a second, and then we made a fast track back to our house. Here we found a nice long pole and some snare wire he always had for snaring rabbits when he went out on his trap line. We hustled back to the bunkhouse where Dad fixed a snare to the end of the pole. He snagged the first bottle and then snagged the second one as well. When we hid in the trees above the trail to see what happened, It wasn't long before the window opened and that hand came out to check the temperature of the Coke. The window opened further and 2 heads peered out and looked down. Soon 2 guys came tromping through the deep snow at the bottom of the bunkhouse. They dug around in the snow for quite a while but could not find the bottles. They could not figure out that as there was no traction in the snow anywhere. It seemed that those Cokes had just disappeared into the thin air. When we got back home, Dad and I couldn't stop laughing as we enjoyed our spirits. I'm making memoirs for my grandson and daughter, so that's number 13. Oh, the puddle trap. That's a good one too. Spring always brought with it new warmth from the sun and elevated feelings of happiness. Thus, as the snow melted after the long winter, water coursed down the many gravel roads to the valley bottom below. It was only slightly impeded by all the little and not so little dams that I would build. They would create great pools of water on which I could sail my toy ships. Puddles were abundant all along the gravel roads, making an excellent testing ground for my sister's brand new pink rubber boots. Sister Juanita would happily push her baby carriage along the road, splashing through each and every puddle that peppered the lane. After I observed this performance for some time, I noticed Juanita turn and head down the road in the opposite direction. Seizing this opportunity, I grabbed my dad's little prospecting shovel and quickly hollowed out one of the small potholes to a great depth. It quickly filled with water, coursing down the road and lay there dangerously unobtrusive. My sister finally made the turn at the far end of her trek, proceeded back up the road, splashing through every puddle in her path. When she splashed into the modified puddle, her boot went to the bottom and filled with muddy water. Smiles turned to tears and she ran into our house crying. Apparently she received a reprimand for puddle splashing while I got away scot-free. My puddle trap worked quite well, but my sister's wrath still continues to this day. So that's 2 out of 22. My dad's what? Oh, well, I'll have to ad-lib that one. But on Christmas Day, one of my presents under the tree was a bugle. It was awesome. So, but I think Dad got it more for himself than for anybody else. Anyways, at 5 o'clock or 5:30, he would play taps, and the sound would echo throughout the community. And at that time, all the kids who heard that dinner call were to go home and have supper. I have given that bugle to my son Stephen, who lives in Prince Rupert. Yeah. Actually, well, I got so many stories here. I don't know if I want to bore you guys anymore, but one more.
A long one, right?
Okay, number 18.
It must be extra.
Claim jumping. Dad was a miner, trapper, and prospector. It was the prospecting trips with him that I really enjoyed. On the evening before the trip, we would make ourselves lunches, pack all of our gear, and make sure that we had enough gas in our 47 Chevy for the return trip. I had my own small backpack that Dad would stuff full of necessities for prospecting. Although I was only 6 or 7 years old, it seemed that he loaded me up like a small pack horse. I was proud to carry the load, as he would load me up with with the blasting powder as it was fairly light. However, he carried the blasting caps with fuses, as they were quite dangerous. We would leave fairly early in the morning to places unknown. Often we headed towards the apex mountain where Dad had some claims and had to do the necessary work to keep them. After parking the car, we would trek through the forest, which was populated with large Douglas fir trees. Under this canopy of branches, it was cool and moist. A thick green carpet of moss often lay underfoot, and I remember him saying that no carpet we have can compare to what the deer and rabbits walk on. When we arrived at the claim, that Dad and I would wander through it, and he would check out croppings of rock, break off a sample with his prospector's pick, and label it and put it in a bag to be assayed. If a particular interesting anomaly was detected, he would dig about it and then prepare a cranny in which he could place the dynamite. With a few sticks of 70% from my backpack, he would insert the cap with fuse attached, jam it in the crevice, and then light the fuse. As a few burns at 40 seconds per foot, he knew exactly when the charge would detonate. Plenty of time was allowed to get us to the predetermined safe place before the resulting explosion. After the smoke cleared, Dad would take more samples, label them, and we would trek on to another promising location. Dad had several claims between Nickel Plate and the Apex Mountain, one of which he came by in a nefarious manner. At that time, it was necessary to cut and blaze the lines of the claim and erect posts or use trees as claim demarcations. Once this was completed, metal claim tags were nailed on the corner posts identifying the claim and owner. Well, I guess a previous prospector had put in several claims, well marked with the lines blazed through the woods. However, this person, who Dad knew well, must have run out of tags on his last claim. He failed to attach the metal tags to the post, and thus the claim could not be filed. Dad popped his tags on the new post, and the shit hit the fan. From then on, he was known as Claim Jumper Graham. It was all done in jest, and no hard feelings were held. However, much frivolity was made of the situation. Dad and I always found a cool, comfortable place to have a break. Often these rest places still had a real running past in which to cool our drinks. Moments like this are remembered vividly. Often we had to take a couple of aspirin, as the smell of the nitroglycerin from the dynamite could give us a pretty good headache. But these aches quickly passed, and on our way home we would celebrate with another exceptional outing and a bottle of Coke. Thank you.
My dad was the superintendent up at the mine before the Williams moved into our place. We moved out, they moved in. The story isn't mine because I was too small. The story is my brother Paul's. Apparently, he was the great friend of Ray Palumbo. Perry Palumbo was the dad. And my brother Paul took a real shine to Perry Palumbo, and he knew that Perry worked night shift, so he would be sleeping during the day. And when all of the kids were playing, our houses joined, and when all of the kids were playing in our yard, Paul got right underneath Perry Palumbo's window and yelled, "Everybody be quiet! Perry's sleeping!" Which, of course, my dad loved to relate. Thank you.
So just a couple of quick memories of Nickel Plate, because I was quite young. We left when the mine closed, and I think I was 6 years old. So I did grade 1 at Nickel Plate, and then we moved over to the East Kootenays to Canal Flats. But when Garnet was mentioning some of the exploits of his dad, one of the things, we lived right next door to the Grahams, and, you know, my parents being the protective types they were, you know, had a nice little fence around our yard. And anyway, you know, that way my mom and dad could keep an eye on me, make sure I didn't get into, you know, any difficulty or wander too far. Anyway, one day, my mom came out and I was nowhere to be seen. But there was this big block of wood on the one side of the fence and another one on the other side. And it turns out that Howard Graham had, you know, put these blocks of wood so I could make my escape over the fence. And he, when my mom said, "What are you thinking? You know, what were you doing?" And he said, "Well, the poor little fellow looked like he really didn't like being in there, so I just wanted to give him a hand." So that was just one of many, many stories. The other thing, my dad played in an old-time orchestra up there, and I know Cliff McDonald played fiddle. My dad played accordion. I think there was Warren and Marion Allen. I don't recall who the other folks were in that group, but you know, one of my memories was listening to rehearsals and so on, listening to that group play, and you know, I still have a fondness for that music. But my parents used to talk very fondly about Nickel Plate for many years afterwards, because as has already been mentioned here, as I think only happens in that type of community, there was a lot of closeness. You know, there didn't seem to be any kind of class structure. People mixed and mingled, became good friends, and really it was a wonderful place, I think, to grow up, certainly as a child. And I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
My grandmother and my grandfather, they actually lived in Nickel Plate long, long before we did. And Howard and Mary were up there, and at that time, Mary and my mother, Anna and Johnny, were just children. And I believe they lived over in Bogastown, which is where people lived in those days before the new houses were built. So Howard was one day really pissed off because some dog kept peeing on his garbage can. He said, "I'm going to get this damn dog." So he took and he got a piece of metal which he put out beside his garbage can. It was a metal garbage can. He got a 12-volt battery, and he hooked the positive to the garbage can and the negative to this plate he'd put on the ground. And he's working on this, and along comes Uncle John, and he's just a little boy. And Grandma and Grandpa were still living there. And, "What are you doing, Uncle John?" "I'm going to get that damn dog," he says. He got it all rigged up, and he said, "Well, I should test this. John, would you pee on my garbage can?" Well, Johnny's just a little boy. He did. And did he let out a yell, and Grandma called him, come flying out of the house, "You killed my Johnny, you killed my Johnny." And that is Howard Graham, and he was always a character. That's it for me. Any more Howard Graham stories?
I don't have a Howard Graham story, but I got a story about Nickel Plate and the community that we had up there. So it was a mining community, and one of the things that was really important was the safety down in the mine. And they had a very strong, they just did the mine rescue. They were very conscientious in making sure that the mine was safe and making sure that it was a safe place to work. And part of that was having these mine rescue competitions that we would have down in Princeton every year. And there was a lot of mines throughout the area, and every mine had its own mine rescue team. And I don't know, it's sort of like St. John's Ambulance or something, that they would have an organization on what they had to do, and they would have a fake mine course laid out in a big field, and the miners would have to go through that, and there would be test things that they would have to respond to in emergency type situations in a mine. And it was a huge competition. It was a big thing in each mining community as to how everybody did in that mine rescue. And I don't know where Nickel Plate placed, but I know that mine rescue and safety was on the top priority throughout the time that the mine was there. And we brought home quite a few trophies. But it wasn't just the miners. It was the whole community got involved. The ladies had a St. John's ambulance rescue team, and they had competitions for the ladies. The ladies brought home trophies, and we've got pictures of that in the museum now. And as kids, we had, for weeks before the competitions came down in Princeton, we'd be practicing our first aid. So it was St. John's Ambulance Level 1, Level 2, Level 3. And we were doing, learning how to do resuscitation, where you took the arms and lift them up above the head. We didn't have mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but the kids would have their teams as well. So the whole community would end up in Princeton, out in one of the fields, going through their trials to see how you did in safety and learning to be St. John's Ambulance first aid people. I don't know whether you guys remember all of those and how important they were to the community, but and nobody's mentioned that was part of the whole community thing. Anybody else? Somebody's got a story.
We started with our sleighs, and we went down until there was no more snow, and we kept walking on the road down to Hedley, and there's a big rock bluff there, if you know where it is. We got there, we got to the rock bluff, and it looks straight down to Hedley, so we thought, let's just go slide down these rocks. And then we decided, no, that wasn't a good idea. And then someone, was it you, started crying? And everybody was upset. It was getting dark, and we needed to go home and didn't think we could make it all the way back. We were hungry and wet, and lo and behold, I don't know who it was, came with his truck looking for us. Was it Alex? And he picked us all up, and when we got home, boy, were we in trouble. I think someone, I don't know which one, got a spanking with the coal shovel. And I didn't get spanked. My dad he just have to look at me and go, Mabel? And I was scared to death. So that's our story, and I'm sticking to it.
I'm not a public speaker by any stretch of the imagination, but anyway, there's stories flying around about people riding the broom down the tram line. Well, some people did, but it wouldn't last long because the brooms didn't last. But when I lived up in Central till I was 6 years old. My dad was a hoistman at the Central Station, and then was a tramline foreman from there on until the mine shut down, and then he hauled the old tram and went up the north end of Vancouver Island, pounded away at that for another 7 or 8 years. Anyhow, as I recall it, Dad had a slide that was made in the carpenter shop, and the slide was about, maybe 16 inches wide and about 4 feet long, and on one end of it had a box, and on the other end there were 2 slats that went up, and then there was just a cross piece, and then there was a steel shoe under the front end and under the main slide, and then he had an old rubber boot, and I don't know how thick the sole in that boot was, but it must have been awful thick, because I can remember a groove worn in it from that was the brake, from riding the rail down on that slide. And then we used a broomstick to balance themselves. And when we would go to town or something for the weekend, Dad let us down, and then he would ride the slide down the hill and walk down through the mill, and then we'd go and do whatever we wanted to do. And then on the weekends, and then we'd come home. And I remember a couple of occasions when we came home, Dad would fire up the old service tram there to the tipple, and he'd haul us up there, and then we'd have to sit there and wait until Dad walked up the track to the Central Station, and he always wore a white shirt on a Sunday. And I can remember my dad going up that hill. It seemed to take him 100 years, but anyway, 5-year-old kid, time doesn't mean too much. Anyway, and then he would fire up the big tram and take us up there. I got a couple more little memories here. I remember I saw my first movie in the hall at Nickel Plate. I was maybe 5 years old or 4. I can't even remember, but anyway, my mother was up there visiting with the people by the name of Alexander that lived there at the time, and she was busy talking, and so a bunch of kids were going to the afternoon matinee, and nothing to do. I had to go too because that was out of her hair. And I went to this movie, and I'd never been in a movie theater before, never been around kids before, because I lived in Central. We were kind of lonesome up there. And anyway, all the lights went out. Well, that wasn't a very good idea. And the next thing I know comes the movie. I still remember it was a black and white version of The Wizard of Oz. And ever since then, I don't like movies. And another time we were up there at the Christmas concert, and I don't know, I was maybe 5 at the time, and I can remember this one guy had this act, and he was singing this song, and he was waving a sword from here to this fella here, and I was scared because I figured he was going to get us. And then the next act was some guys were putting on a show about duck hunting out on the lake there, and they're out with the shotguns and the caps under the hammers, and bang, 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 and then after that we went out somewhere. I didn't know at the time, but I was talking to Helen Overton here several years ago, and she said, yeah, I know we went out to the Overton place, but they were out of the Candy mine, and he was a watchman there. It was shut down by this time, and I remember sleeping on a pile of coats there where all the folks were, mom and dads were dancing and what have you, and I still remember that. And that's about the few little things that I can remember. You know, I don't know, there's other stories, but I could go on forever, but I won't. One more? Oh, I don't know. Well, let's see. Well, I don't know if all of you people rode the tram line. How many of you did? Well, everybody said it was quite an adventure, and I guess it was, but to me it was just up and down ordinary thing to do, because that's the way we went to town, or else walk, and it was a long walk for little kids. And so Dad was a hoistman there at Central, and for a number of years, and then later years he became the tram foreman, and like I said, took the tramway out and took it up the island. Yeah, there was some adventure. One time they had a runaway on the tram line, and I was just starting school. It was not a nice thing to happen, but I was walking down the back street here behind Tremaine's house, which is the manager of the Mascot Mine, and we were walking down through the bush to school. And all of a sudden there was this god-awful roar, and there was a big cloud of smoke and dust and where the passing station was. And I don't know if you guys understood, the tram line was built on 3 rails, and then when the skips passed, they had 4. And they called that the passing station. Anyway, there was a fellow killed on that one, and I didn't know what to do, because the school teacher we had at the time was named Miss McKelvey, and she had a long, what they call a iron fist in the boarding house reach kind of thing. She wasn't above hanging a licking on you for anything, and so I was afraid to go home because I didn't know what had happened. I thought maybe my dad was hurt or something, and I was afraid not to go to school. So I suffered it out until I got home at noon hour and find out that Dad was okay. So that was kind of a scary one, that one. And other than that, pretty normal upbringing, I guess, in those days. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let it go with that, I guess.
I don't have a story, but I should thank the Browns for leaving town. Because we got their house. Another memory I have is Ronnie Williams, and to this day I still am jealous of his train set. And Patsy, please say hi to him for me. Graham was talking about, Garney Graham was talking about a trumpet, or a bugle. Yes, I remember that. And I think that's where my dad got the idea to retaliate. At Christmas time, my brother and I used to get hordes and hordes of fireworks from the cookhouse, from the Chinaman. Well, my brother and I never got to use them because my dad would pick a night. He'd go over to the Graham's house under Garnett's dad's bedroom window. He'd let them all off. The next day he'd find out, oh, I sleep on the other side of the bed. So the next year, same thing, but Dad would go around the corner to the other window. Next day, we changed sides this year. But that's kind of the memories. I don't really remember too much other than the Grahams, the Frenches, and the Williams, and a few other extra things that we used to do. I know that for the past few years I've had people talk about discipline, family discipline and that, and they're complaining about their mom or dad or something like that. And I said, well, yeah, how would you like to be brought up by 40 moms and 40 dads?
Hello, everyone. Just a couple of things I was going to mention. One was a story about the fact that along the tram tracks they used to clear the old ties out and pile them up and burn them. And a couple of very impressionable young fellows watched them doing this and decided that they should go down and try lighting a little fire. So there's a certain person here by the name of Bob Richards, who I would at this moment like to thank very much for all his work involved in getting this group together. And myself decided to go down to his aunt's place and tell a tale about the fact that Mum had run out of matches for the fire. So we got a box of matches, because at home you wouldn't take the matches. That was very serious business. And we went down in the sagebrush. This is in, I'm guessing, late June, and it was fairly dry at the time up there. And we lit a little fire. Well, the little fire wasn't so little very quickly. And the two of us up the hillside and out the road right below Williams' house. Guess who saw the smoke and the flames? Mrs. Williams came tracking down and caught the two of us coming out of the bush, and they had to call the fire brigade and put the fire out. Fortunately, they put the fire out. In today's atmosphere, I think that would have been very, very serious. But right then, I can just remember getting a little discipline at home. We won't talk about that. I was asked to come up and just talk a little bit about the school. I think Bob thinks that because I was a teacher I know something about schools, but I really don't. But my memories are Leafy Dallas. Just about everybody here probably that was a nickel plate had Leafy Dallas as a teacher. We had her for 3 years. At first she was teaching grades 1 through 6. And when I was there, by the time I got to the school, it was divided into 2 rooms, and we had Leafy Dallas for grade 1 to 3. And then my memories in the middle of who took over when I went into grade 4 are a little limited, but I do remember the teacher we had in our last 2 years there, which was Miss Kerr. And we all had to learn how to do Highland dancing. And that was what was put on for all the shows at Christmas time and that. So I'd just like to say thank you again to all those who organized, and good memories. Thank you.
When the mine rescue team used to go and do all the mine rescue things that they did.
What's your name?
Jose Jimenez.
Perfecto.
That's what it says here. Yeah. Anyway, during the mine rescue team, all the mine rescues, the men would do all their mine rescue things. And in one of the high schools, only one in Princeton, there was first aiders would do their things. And there was the Emrys and the Richards were on one team. And I happened to be the patient one time. And when the instructor or whoever was put a note on your chest saying what was wrong with you. Well, anyway, my right leg always went flat. It never stood up. It always went over flat. And they said, well, hey, this is pretty good. We don't have to tell him to lay his leg over. Anyway, So we'd do 3 competitions, and the Richards and the Emerys would win first on one, second on the other, and the other team, the third team, would win third all the time, because that's just the way it was. So be it. That's how good we were. But we had to do all the splinting and all the bandaging and all the rest of that goofy stuff, which we don't have to do nowadays, because somebody else will do that for us. I don't know what else to say, other than the fact that it's nice to see all you people from Nickel Plate out here that we haven't seen in many years. And I don't suppose many of us will be around for the next one, whenever that might happen to be, unless it's next year, of course. And I don't think, well, I don't know, maybe Brother Bob will organize it again, I don't know. With the help of his little brother Tom. And without the help of me.
We get the really young people to do it.
Oh, the young people!
Yeah, I mean, there's some people 60, eh?
The 60-year-olds!
Yeah. Well,
hey, that's a good idea.
60, but, you know.
That's us out, right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, anyhow, I don't know what else to say other than who likes this weather? Not me, that's for damn sure. I mean, this smoke and stuff bothers my eyes, and I can taste dust at night when I'm sleeping. So that's how I get this, eating too much dust. Anyway, thank you very much.
Wayne Danhauer again. You wanted to hear another Howard Graham story, and I have a little one. We lived across the street from the Grahams, and I was probably about 5 or 6. And there was a big tree right on their corner of their yard, and the branches went up, didn't start till they were about 20 feet up. And I remember this cat got stuck on this tree. And it was there for one day, and everybody said, oh, all the kids would say, oh, you know, we got to get that cat down. And everybody said, oh, no. Parents would say, oh, just leave the cat. He'll come down on his own. Don't worry. Second day, the cat's still stuck up on the tree. So all us kids were still complaining that this poor cat, you know, we've got to get it down from the tree. And so, no, don't worry about it. Anyway, the third day, the cat obviously isn't going to come down. Now, it's been up there for 3 days. So we're all whining and complaining. Finally, Howard Graham comes out of the house, and he had that long pole that you used to collect those Coke bottles with, Garney. And he just walked out and he grabbed this pole, he reached up and he knocked the cat right out of the tree, and the cat fell about 25 feet onto the ground and just landed feet first and just took off like a rocket. So your daddy, he solved that problem for us. We all us kids around the block were finally happy the cat was out of the tree. That's the Howard Graham.
In the last few days, I've been at the museum and welcoming some of you and listening to stories, and that is something that I really gathered from all of you, is that everyone shared, everyone got along, you know, true sense of camaraderie. And I agree, we should take lessons from, you know, our forefathers and the offsprings of our forefathers. It's been wonderful to meet all of you.